Hello, everyone. A warm welcome to this Translation Studies webinar, Meet the World Translating Genre. It's part of the Advanced Scandinavian Translation Workshop series, and it's run by the British Centre for Literary Translation. It's wonderful to have you all with us for this session. And before we begin quizzing the translators, I wonder just if we can say that we'll take questions throughout the session. So if you'd like to put your questions in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen there, we'll take those as we go. And I should also, I'd like to say before you begin, huge thank you to Kate Griffin and also to Martin Waters for steering us in this session. So without further ado, let me just say very briefly, I'm Dr. Jacky Collins from Stirling University. I work in the Spanish and Latin American Studies department, but I did begin my academic journey many years ago at Newcastle University, where I did Scandinavian studies. So it's wonderful to be here for this session, talking to translators who deal with those Scandinavian texts. Anyway, without further ado, let me introduce you to the translators. First of all, Alex Fleming. Hi, Alex, and welcome. Alex, a literary translator from Swedish and Russian into English, working across a range of genre, and her recent translations include Anders de la Motta's The Mountain King, Camilla Steen's The Resting Place, and Maxim Osipov's Kilometer 101. Co-translated with Boris Streliuk and Nicholas Pasternak Slater. Katrin Kilos Marcel's Mothers of Invention as well. And she's also editor of Swedish Book Review, a journal of new Swedish writing. Alex, I wonder if I could just start by settling us in by asking you about the experience of co-translating. Could you talk to us about how that's been for you?
Yeah, so that particular project, the Kilometer 101 and predecessor, Rock, Paper, Scissors, they're actually both collections of short stories that were worked on in groups of translators. So from Russian, I should also say. So while we split up the stories in quite a straightforward way, we each took one and then looked over each other's. It was actually a really rewarding way to work, that you didn't have those kind of clashes in the actual translation itself, but at the same time I took so much, especially working with translators that are more experienced than myself, in how they deal with the same sorts of problems, and how together you work to kind of capture that authorial voice in a similar way and make sure it's consistent. So yeah, no, it was a wonderful experience, and I really took a lot from it.
Thank you for that. Because I often wonder, that a little bit like the author's journey, that the translator's journey, I can imagine that sometimes it can be a lonely experience, and to work with others and have that chance to discuss with others. Yeah. Thanks, Alex. I will be back with you. Next, Rosie Hedger. And I have to say a thank you to you personally, Rosie, because I've read some of your work, some of that translation work that you've done. Born in Scotland, and you completed your MA Honours in Scandinavian Studies at the University of Edinburgh, where you graduated with a distinction in Norwegian. Rosie's translated work by authors including Marie Aubert, Helga Flatland, and Agnes Ravatin. And her translation of Gina Cornelia Pedersen's Zero was shortlisted for the Oxford Weidenfeld Translation Prize in 2019. And her translation of Agnes Ravatin's The Bird Tribunal won an English Pen Translates Award in 2016. And again, from me, a huge thank you for the Bird Tribunal. Rose has lived in Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, but is now based in the UK. Rosie, for your start, I was going to ask you about the Oxford Weidenfeld Translation Prize, if I may, because I've not heard about that. Could you tell us a little bit about that prize?
Yeah, so there were about, I think, 10 of us who were longlisted. And actually, I think for me, the best part, I didn't win the award, but the best part of the event was that there were so many other translators there. So everybody came who had translated one of the texts that was longlisted. They also had professional actors who read out excerpts of the text. So, that was amazing to see your text really come to life in front of the audience. And I think it was just, that was such a unique experience to see that. And actually, it didn't feel like a competition. We were all just kind of sitting there, and as translators, we were kind of in awe, like, look at our work being read out, and see how much life has been into it. So I think that, when I think back to that award, I immediately think of the event and all the people I met. And actually, it was just such a nice experience to come together and just talk about things that we've been doing, things that the people have been doing. I think that's something that's so common, events like this seminar as well that we're sitting in Barcelona these few days. We just like to talk about what we do, because as you pointed out, it can be lonely. I think that, part of it is that you are making a lot of decisions on your own. So to co-translate or to just get together with others, I think is a huge part of it. So yeah.
Thank you, Rosie. Thanks for that. And our third translator, Megan Turney. Hi, Megan, a Staffordshire-based literary and commercial translator and editor, working from Norwegian and Danish into English. She was the recipient of the National Centre for Writing's 2019 Emerging Translator Mentorship, and holds an MA Hons in Scandinavian Studies and English Literature from the University of Edinburgh, and an MA in Translation and Interpreting Studies from the University of Manchester. Megan, it's wonderful to meet you. Thank you for being part of this. I wonder if you could talk to us about that mentorship in 2019 that you received, Emerging Translator. What did that do for you? How has that changed who you are as a professional?
Oh, I know Rosie and Alex are both alumni of the same program, so you probably feel the same way, that it just completely opened doors for you as a professional. Something about literary translation in particular, the industry just seems like impenetrable. Like, it just seems so cryptic from the outside. Like, you've got no idea how you even get your first job. And to me, it just meant, I got to hone my skills with like an excellent tutor, Kari again, thank you. And then, you get to meet all these people as well. So I don't think I'd have got my first full-length novel translation had I have not been in there, because that's how I met West Camel from Arended Books, and my first novel, and how I got the rest of my novels. So yeah, huge difference. And it's just great fun as well. So all round, an excellent thing to take part in, and I heartily recommend doing it, as I'm sure Alex and Rosie do as well.
Wonderful. I mean, again, as you say, that you are all part of that scheme, that NCW Emerging Translators mentoring scheme from the National Centre of Writing. And it is clearly, I don't know, that supportive network as well that has come out of this, even in these first few minutes that we've begun to discuss what your profession, how, the things that you've been involved in. There are these, repeating ideas. Okay, so here we go. You have that Scandi link in common. And I wonder, though, where did your desire to be translators, where did it come from? Were you drawn into Scandi Noir, which is where my passions sit, or were you drawn into translation from a different genre, style, literary or commercial? Alex, where did it all begin for you?
Well, I suppose my interest, it came from reading a lot, and I've always loved languages, and I'm really lucky that I was sort of brought up in a house where not many languages are spoken, but there was that constant interest in different cultures and different literatures. And so I went on. I studied languages at uni, not Swedish, but then life took me to Sweden after uni, and I was working there, and obviously learning the language. I was working part-time, so I had time on my hands and I was looking for other things to keep me busy, and other jobs. But the Swedish Noir was, or the Scandinavian Noir, but in particular books from Swedish, were the books that I was reading as I was learning Swedish. They were the first books that actually became available to me in Swedish, partly because that was the sort of the boom, and also because I think they were really great sort of insight into a culture, and as well into a language, though admittedly with some very sort of specialist vocab that you know may or may not be useful to you in your later life. But yeah, so literary translation just sprung of a love of language, and yeah, of being able to kind of play with words and play with language all the time.
Thanks, Alex. There's a question from Helen that I've seen, but if we can hear from the translators, and then I'll come to that question, Helen. Really appreciate that. Megan, for yourself, was it very clear when you were at uni, was it clear that you would be the translator that you've become?
It's funny, ironically, I was terrible at languages at school. Like, I think if my French teacher were watching this and had seen like what became of me, he'd be gobsmacked. And I also really didn't enjoy languages either. But I think I felt like a bit of an affinity for the northern climes, so that Scandinavian studies was an option at university to study alongside English Lit, which I'd already had my heart on. And then it wasn't until I think the end of second year, after we'd actually completed our first translation module, taught by Ian, who I know is here. And yeah, it was the perfect mix of mechanical and kind of like a process and a creative, because like I could never imagine myself writing a book from scratch, but playing around with someone else's words is like perfect for me. So yeah, I came in late, and then for
Megan, you were lagging a little bit with us there. I think from what we can, I think what we can see though is how the passion has certainly grown and developed. It might not be where you started to think about, but that experience at university and the way that took you forward and experiences there. So thank you. Apologies for any of the sound stuff there. No worries. We'll keep moving if that's okay. Rosie, for yourself, were you set on this from a tender age, or did you also come sort of like to this in a roundabout way?
I think that I have a very similar experience actually to Alex and Megan, in that, you know, always a big reader, even started off at university doing English literature, took Norwegian as my kind of third outside subject, and just really enjoyed it. It was such a small group of people, really small class. And that was just lovely, you know, to come and feel like you knew everyone in your class. When I compare it to when I learned French and there were like 300 of us in a lecture theatre, it's just not the same experience. And, you know, you can't learn a language as well in those kind of settings, I think. So yeah, that kind of started for me, doing a bit of translation, really finding enjoyment in that creative process. But like Megan says, not having to come up with the entire plot yourself is very helpful. So, you know, just kind of following that path and being helped into that. Before I started translating, before I did the mentorship scheme, and Kari, who was my teacher as well, was very helpful in kind of linking me up with people who were looking to have samples done. So I kind of took it nice and slowly and worked in that direction. But yeah, I don't think I would ever imagine that. I didn't come from a background where translator was on my radar, even though actually I think if someone had said to me, you could do this, wow, that would be amazing, you know?
I think for me, what comes out of the experience of the three of you is that sense of you never know when that moment might present itself, and that, you know, it's not necessarily has to be set in stone, that from the get-go, this is what I'm going to be. Thank you. Kate kindly put in the chat there, Kate's kindly put the link to information about the NCW Emerging Translator and this mentoring scheme. So please, people that are with us, do please avail yourself of that. Really useful information. Yeah. Ellen has asked this question, so I will throw it out to whoever which one of the three of you would like to start this. But Helen asks, it's lovely to be here. Helen, it's great to have you with us. I'm intrigued to find out more about the mentorship scheme. Okay, so that's great. Kate's put that information there. But could you please point me in the right direction? I'm a newbie who's emerging from teaching French and German and trying to establish a specialist area. So if we put that to the translators, how did you, from translating at uni and getting into it, how did you take those first steps of going into a specialist area, and which area was that first specialist area that you went into? Rosie, do you want to set us off on that?
I mean, for me, I think I did the opposite, actually, picking a specialist area. And actually how much picking was involved is another thing, because when I started out, I was doing short samples. So it was very much a case of being connected with someone, somebody giving my details. So in this case, speaking with Kari, she put me in touch with an agent, for instance. So it kind of went from there. But actually what I found helpful at the time was just to do as many different kinds of texts as possible. So, we're speaking about genre related, but, I did children's literature, I did cookery books, I did a lot of commercial stuff, I did a catalogue about banisters that go downstairs, I did a diabetes survey, I just, anything that was offered to me pretty much. And by doing that, I was able to find out, what am I good at, not so good at, not so fond of, what am I willing to do for the money anyway, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Megan, was it the same for you, or did you go straight into that specialist area?
No, I'm laughing because that was word for word the exact same for me. For the commercial side as well, it is a difficult industry in some ways, in that it's just so fragmented. So getting the work is really about kind of building up a portfolio. So for me, it was just honing my skills through all of the work that I was getting in, that I was desperate for. And then that meant I was kind of guided as to where I felt that my passions and actual, interests lay. And yeah, so I think you're very lucky if you can get straight into specialization. But I certainly did try. I was certainly doing a lot of passion projects on texts that I really loved on the side, but of course not paid. So it's difficult, I would say.
Yeah, I'd like us to come to that point as well of going from, it's almost like the training to actually being able to present a piece of work that that hard work, is recognized by the being published and the being paid for that work. Alex, just to make sure though that we hear from you and that, getting started, and if you were able to be in that specialist area.
Well, I don't have too much to add because my trajectory is exactly the same. I started off in commercial, doing everything, knowing what I absolutely could not do. So no medical or anything like that. But yeah, it took me time, a lot of time, or I think Megan's sort of touched upon how difficult it can be to sort of get your foot in the door of literary translation. But actually, it was really good having that kind of long period of honing my craft before I did, because then I could come and I knew what I could bring to the table, as it were.
Strikes me then, from what the three of you've said, it's that willingness to just do and be, and serve that apprenticeship time in a way, and almost like watch and wait. But we will come back to that. Well, and thanks again, Helen, for your question. I hope that's helped, and maybe in the sense of it's not going to come. Yeah, great. It's not just going to come and happen. That time that's needed. What I'm hearing then is that working in commercial fiction, and I wonder, just for an anecdote, I wonder if you could give us the funniest thing that either as a passion project or as paid work that you have done, that it's just this is, I mean, I like the banister text, right? I think that's it, but something that you never ever thought that your life would ever be involved in, but you immersed yourself because that's what's needed, and you came away with a bank of knowledge, that is just like, you'll never be free from what you experienced. Alex, can you think of something?
Oh no, I did when I was actually, though I am free of this knowledge, but there was a while I translated a pet shampoo website, and so I knew all about the various like allergens and things like that, and I was quoting it for ages whenever anyone had a pet, but actually, 5 years down the line, it's gone. It's sort of
it's washed away the allergens.
Yeah, all these kind of deaths and murders have washed it away. So
yeah, the strong stuff, definitely. yeah. Megan, is there something that was part of your life for a while that was so like, what is this? And maybe you've managed to be free from it now.
It's so funny because it's constant in this job. I'm sure Alex and Rosie all say the same. Like, for me, one of the best parts of the job is deep diving into a topic I'd never have looked into. I'd say in terms of funniest, I'm sure there are so many other funny ones I've got, but this, I would say, like with crime fiction, a lot of the time when you're trying to really get something right, and there's like someone's probably describing how to load a gun or how to make a bomb, and like you're doing this deep dive and you know that you're going to be on some sort of government watch list, and then your flatmate walks in and looks at your screen and you're like watching a video on how to load ammunition into a revolver, and I'd say that's probably mine.
I remember, sorry, just to jump in, one of my authors speaking about that very thing, that like she feels that she kind of has to type into Google, like after she's been searching how to kill people with a dagger or what sort of she feels like she has to type, don't worry, I'm just an author, I'm just researching it, so that how is that,
you just add translation onto the end.
Exactly.
It's like, it's all good.
Oh, good. It's purely research purpose. Yeah, and nothing sinister, not at all. Was there anything crazier than the banisters that you've been involved with?
Oh no, do you know, I can't remember much. I think that the turnaround on those commercial jobs is often so quick that it's like in one ear out the other. I wasn't thinking or getting involved, but then when Megan talks about like deep diving for a literary translation, very different story, because you're living with that novel or a short story collection, whatever it is, for months. It could be like 6 months. So you do have the opportunity to think and then think again and think again. So yeah, but I mean, when you're laughing about things that happen, I remember I was doing a really difficult project. Actually, it was a co-translation with Olivia Lasky, who might be watching this, and it was very old Norwegian. It was Danish basically, and it was some travelogues by an author, and they were so hard. We accepted the project and had no idea. Didn't know. I mean, we were just like clueless, and we were in different time zones at the time, so we were like writing to each other. And I remember that I sent an email to Olivia, and I was just like, this project, like it is awful. It's like pickling my brain. I don't know what I'm doing. And the author was copied into the email. I'm not the author, sorry, the person who commissioned the project.
Yeah.
And it was like you said, and I just suddenly realized, and I didn't have the recall on to undo the email. I was like, what have I done? So I can't even remember. I think I just sort of like wrote her an email like, oh, sorry, I think she might have been copied into that email. Luckily, I think it was such colloquial English that she didn't quite cotton on to it. But oh my, I just remember the time thinking, that is easily the most embarrassing thing ever. I'm sure I've done more embarrassing things since then in translation, but that just sticks with me, that one, certainly.
Yeah, so be careful on those emails. Be careful not to just
undo. When you can like send it, you can undo it for 30 seconds. I turned that on immediately.
Yes, very wise. Never mind translation skills; those technical skills don't. But yeah. So we have another question. Kathy Sarampa, thank you so much for your question. It says, when we talk about genre, can you explain the difference between literary fiction, upmarket fiction, and commercial fiction? She says, I feel like agents use these terms, but it is a mystery to me. So as translators, those three terms that we've mentioned, when we say them, what do they mean to you? Are they distinct for you? And how would you separate them? Alex, can you separate literary, upmarket, and commercial fiction?
I mean, I understand why the categories exist, and they serve an important purpose, but at the same time, I think they are, the barriers or the boundaries between them are impossible to set, and they're pretty arbitrary. Like literary fiction borrows from genre or borrows genre tropes all the time, and vice versa. Genre can be, you know, written in the most kind of exquisite like language. But yes, and even genre, it sort of breaks down into so many different types of categories or interests. I struggle to sort of find a direct sort of exact definition, but you can sort of put your finger on, get a sense of the sorts of themes that are involved in different ones. Short answer, no. Maybe Megan or Rosie have a better.
Yeah, Megan, Rosie, does that terminology, can you make the distinction and say what it is, or is it or are these boundaries not as fixed as we might think?
I think that actually you kind of hit the nail on the head there about it not being fixed. And I think that one thing that makes me say that is that I have translated work which has been published and kind of marketed as a very different genre from what it is marketed in its own country.
Wow, okay.
And what I would necessarily say that it is. And in a sense, I don't think that's it's not my fight to have. It's not my battle to have. You know, you're getting this all wrong. So when I see the I don't know, the jacket, for instance, if I see that in advance, I can maybe say which one I think would be more suitable based on my reading of the novel, my experience. But that's a decision made by in this case, UK publisher. And that's on them. And if they want to market a book a certain way, then, you know, they can do that. That's, you know, they do that. They know things that I don't know about sales, about all these aspects of it. So I would say that it's not fixed. And this idea of literary fiction, I think actually it's more of a kind of gatekeeping term. I think that actually it's quite exclusive. So yeah, I think, yeah, I again, like Alex says, I know why these things exist, but I think that you would struggle to find an agent who didn't consider what they were pitching to you to be literary fiction. I think they would all say it's literary fiction because that's, you know, that's up here. We all want to be doing literary fiction, right? That's the way that they see the world. And actually, I work in a library, and I've got to say, we don't, you know, people don't come in looking for literary fiction on the whole. They read a whole range of things. And I think that being more open to the different types of genres that people are interested in and kind of importing more of them from abroad might be something that would kind of bring the numbers of translated books up on the whole.
Yeah, thank you. Megan, do you wish to add anything to that's been said already?
Yeah, I think that's so accurate. I think it's really a system level kind of thing. It's a publishing industry market that translators, I think, don't necessarily consider unless it's in the marketing. Like, I think an argument could be made that literary and commercial fiction, it's all about like the language that you use. But I think any translator that enjoys their job and knows what they're doing is having fun with the language, regardless of what kind of text you're working on. Like, we're all trying to make the best text possible. So literary or commercial doesn't really play a part for us. And yeah, having also worked in a library, I think the amount of books that I have scanned in, like the absolute most, are crime fiction novels. Like, they're just, and people love them, and the way that they talk to you about them, it's completely, yeah, I think, you know, there's no point in making them a hierarchy at all.
They're so unfairly scorned, I think, or kind of talked about in a withering manner. And I think, no, it's you know, yeah,
they're popular for a reason. Yeah, I mean, people love them. I've loved them. Similar to Alex, I started reading Scandinavian noir when there was the big boom, right before starting university, and they were amazing. I think I bought like a book a week because I was just, you know, so obsessed with them. I couldn't wait for them to come out in the library. I just went and ordered them.
Thank you, translators. Thank you for that. Now, there are a number of questions that have started to gather, which is wonderful. Thank you for those questions. And just to respond to Lupe, if you can type out your question, because we're not going to take live questions if that's okay. So just take your time typing out your question. I'm going to try and take these in order that they were put in the questions. So it's Rachel Rankin is the next question. Rachel, thank you so much. Rachel says, thanks for the discussion. Should I wonder, do you ever worry about being typecast as a translator? In saying that you will only ever be approached to translate crime novels because you've translated a number of them. Yeah, so getting pigeonholed because of the work that you've done, does it bother you, or do you not care because it's a paid job? And that was my question on the end, not Rachel's.
Yeah, I think I don't necessarily mind, but I also think that while your name might be out there in the public, and people seeing what kind of books you're translating, that behind the scenes you're probably also doing a lot of samples for publishing houses and agencies, and your name is getting about in other places just by virtue of doing these different samples. So I think even if you make a name for yourself on the outside for doing certain texts, I think people don't necessarily always consider that as like the be all end all, because I do think that a lot of what drives the publishing industry is money as well. So like they see a good translated sample and hopefully then you'll get through in different ways.
Yeah. But Alex, Rosie, are you worried about being typecast? Do you not care?
I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah. I think that for myself, I have seen trends in the kind of work I get, but not from publishers, more in the samples that I do. So when Megan mentioned samples from, in my case, Norwegian publishers or Norwegian agents, I think when I started out, I got loads of children's literature, loads. And then all of a sudden it stopped. And then I had quite a lot of crime stuff come. So I think in their mind, they maybe you do something and it's good, and so whenever they have that kind of thing, then they think of you and they send it to you. And I mean that's fine. That doesn't bother me. I think that although I did something that was a bit more experimental once, which is quite difficult, a sample again, and now I keep getting sent like quite difficult ones, and I'm like, stop sending me the hard one. So I think you can get kind of typecast. But I don't think that it's, I don't think there's any kind of logic behind it. I just think it's literally like somebody thinks, oh, I've got a sample that needs doing. Oh, it's similar to such and such. And possibly that would happen with publishers, but I think it depends if you're working with the same publisher a lot or if you're working with others. And in my experience, when I have been working with various publishers, the books aren't similar at all. So I think, it comes from whether it's been commissioned through a sample.
Okay. Thank you. I'm going to take a next question. And Alex, I'm going to start you off with this question. It's Greta that's put this question in. And Greta asks, do you work on books that a particular publisher wants to have translated? Or do you find a book you want to translate and have you ever taken it to a publisher?
A bit of both, but I would say that the majority of the books that I've done have been commissioned initially, at least, by an agent, a Swedish agent. So similar to what Megan and Rosie were saying in the previous question, that I've done samples that may then have been picked up by a UK or US publishing house, and then they've taken me on to do the rest of the translation. I have, especially earlier on in my career, I did a little bit of pitching, and I still do occasionally try to give time to books that I really would love to work on that haven't yet been translated into English. But I think just the demands of time and money, but I stick mostly to commissions, and I've been lucky to have had quite a variety of commissions so far. So that keeps the different sort of sides of my brain, or the different muscles working, and literary muscles working.
Yeah. Thank you, Megan. For yourself, have you ever gone to a publisher and said, "This is a great text. Please, I'll translate it. Will you publish it?"
I have so many texts lined up that I would love to pitch. Some that I've done samples for, and some that I've just read and can't believe that they've not been like published in English. But it's similar to what Alex was saying, time constraints and the fact that a lot of the time you are preparing this text for free, which is fine when you're very passionate about it. But, you know, when you do need to make a living out of it, it's quite difficult to find that time. And public pitching is just so difficult anyway. Like it's very much about the network, you know, and it's it's hard when you just don't know how to contact the right people. So it's pretty much always commissioning work for me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting point you raise, that idea of knowing the network, knowing who to approach. You know, how do you get into that? And then even when you're in, you know, when there's so much traffic, shall we say, when do you get a chance to, you know, to say, excuse me about this? Alongside the idea of, yeah, well, I have to take this next job because I have a mortgage or various things that need to be paid. So that juggling. Rosie, have you got a book that you found and was successful in pitching to a publisher?
I've never really properly had a go at that. And I think, you know, it's just the case. When I started out, you know, I was doing part-time translation alongside my other jobs. So I was teaching for a number of years and doing translation on the side. And it kind of came, I did a bit less teaching, a bit more translation. It kind of went back on the board. And nowadays I do like part-time translation around family and around another job. But basically over the years, I've never really felt like I've got loads of time and I really want to pitch this passion project, because you only have so many hours in the day. You have to do paid work, and translation doesn't pay particularly well. So for a lot of people, that means having other jobs, which is nice. I actually think it really benefits translation to kind of get out and do another tech job.
Yes.
But yeah, I've never felt like, you know, it's going to be healthy for me to sit in and do a load more translation on top of all the jobs, which always tend to come in like huge waves. It's like buses, you know, you wait and then several people at once and you're churning through all of those, and then they go, and then it's dead quiet, but you just need a bit of a break. And then it's the same process again. So personally for me, I work, you know, when I'm commissioned to do texts, and I don't think that the success rate is that high. I don't think that it's a good way to spend time unless you have a very good contact and, you know, you have a very good chance of a particular text going somewhere. I just think it's a really difficult way to do things.
Thank you. Next question is from Ruth. And Ruth has been asking about a specific genre, that of graphic novels. The idea of written with, you know, simpler language or less text, definitely. As people who are translating, do you feel that they are growing in popularity? Have you seen, Megan, you I see the head nodding, you say, yeah, do you want to talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we've had an influx of them, and they're really fun to work on. You can see, I see obviously the publishing house that sends me them posting a lot about their popularity in Norway, and it's incredible. Yeah, it's just, I would love to translate one if there's a publishing house watching, anyone in publishing. But yeah, I'm definitely seeing, and just in the UK anyway, I don't know about translated graphic novels, but on the whole, really growing in popularity.
Yeah, Rosie, Alex, have you had experience with the graphic novels?
I'm afraid I don't, so I don't have anything to add to this. But I have seen more coming through. But yes,
I did a sample a few years ago, and then I extended the sample, and it was published by Words Without Borders, and it was so fun to do. But the challenge I hadn't thought about in advance is not writing too much to fit in the bubbles, right? Yeah. This was something that was so unique to graphic novels compared to, like, you know, for a novel you can kind of go on, no one will know, but you only have that space to work in. And for Norwegian to English, it does tend to be longer in English just naturally. So that was a challenge that I hadn't anticipated. So that was a really interesting learning experience, just thinking, how can I get everything in that I need to in a really short and snappy way.
You saying that makes me think about subtitling. as well. That again,
I've never done that.
Yeah, you've got that box and you have to convey that message that is said in that frame within that box. Yeah, so whilst it might be fewer words to translate, the idea of getting the message in, yeah. Charis has asked a question. This is lovely. A book recommendation from each of you, presumably I mean, it can be one that you yourselves have translated, but maybe, you know, a book that is yet to be translated. We could take that, or a book that you know that somebody else has translated that you just think it's a book that we should be, but definitely in translation.
I have one.
No, Megan, go on, Megan. Yeah, go on.
No, if Alex, do you want to?
No, you go first. I had a follow-up question.
Okay.
I recently read Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, and it's short stories, and I love short stories, and it was incredible. Yeah, heartily recommend that. Translated by Antonia.
Okay, thank you. Will you say the title for us again?
Cursed Bunny.
Cursed Bunny. Love the sound of it. Thank you. Alex, you were going to ask another question.
I was going to. I sort of have a couple of options, but depending on does it need to be in a particular genre or just any book?
I think, Sherry, the question is a book recommendation. There's no stipulation.
So one book that I've been reading recently is Ia Jernberg's The Details, Detaljerna in Swedish, that has recently come out in the States, in a translation by Kira Josefsson, and it's a wonderful book about a life, but viewed through its fragments and portraits of people that were central in that person's life. That's a really lovely book. In suspense or crime, I really love Stina Jackson's work, and yeah, she's been translated into English as well.
Thank you. Rosie, recommendations?
I just came to me randomly there because I read it a few years ago, but Roy Jacobson's The Unseen, translated by Don Bartlett and Don Shaw. I was just checking, it was definitely who translates it. I thought it was. Yeah, I thought that was really great. Just I read a lot and books kind of come and go, but some linger. And I think for that one, like the setting really lingered with me and the characters. There was a lot of clever stuff done in translation as well, I think, with it. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Beautiful. Thank you again. Just to people who are putting your questions in, it's really good. You're saving me an awful lot of work here, and it's lovely because it's good to know what you're wanting to hear about. Kasia Beresford is asking, she says, I'm translating a thriller with a realistic setting. I spotted some inaccuracies relating to the setting and emailed the author with them. I got a friendly and useful replies, but also a list of issues raised by a geeky fan that need to be reflected in the text. The author is asking, how would I like to approach this? So what would you recommend? She says the author rewrites in source language and retranslate. Work on it together in the English. Author speaks decent English via Zoom. So dealing with these issues with the author. How would you advise to go about that?
I think it depends if there's a publisher involved or not. I can't tell from the question. I was just reading it there. If this is going to be published and there's a publisher, you know, in the language you're translating into, I would turn to them and I'd ask them, because I've seen a range of things done. A translation that I did recently, the publisher felt, the ending's not very clear. Spoke to the author and the author said, yes, I want this opportunity to clear things up because I've had people coming to me in Norway and saying, what happened at the end? I don't understand. So the author wrote something in English, which then the editor kind of polished, shall we say. And I didn't kind of play any part in that, but, you know, there were other options as well, the kind that Kasia suggests. So yeah, ask the publisher, the editor, I think, would be my first protocol.
Oh. Megan, Alex, have you worked with an author like that where you've been on Zoom with them, or you've been discussed in English with them? Alex, how have you done that?
Yes, and actually, for one of the more recent books that I've translated, which is coming out next year in English, some of the references were far too Swedish, and the jokes just weren't kind of hitting home. So he actually wrote entirely new segments. I mean, we're talking quite short segments, only a couple of paragraphs, but just so that the chapters sort of flowed in a nice way, and you weren't left wondering, or the focus was on the story rather than just an English language reader being puzzled by what's going on. So that he actually wrote sections in Swedish, and I translated. But I think if a publisher is involved in the project, then you need to be clear about what your responsibilities are. If it's significant rewrites, then that needs to be compensated for, and also you need to be really clear what it brings to a text. Yes, corrections need to be made, and those sort of editorial changes should be caught with the help of an editor. But yes, it's really good to have an open sort of communication with the editor and with the author as well. And I've always found that very beneficial in my work.
Megan, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I've been in a similar situation where I found like inconsistencies in works that I've translated that have obviously been missed out in the editorial stage in the source country. And yeah, I've found that when it comes to actually working with the authors, a lot of the time they have been far too busy to get on a Zoom call with the likes of me. So I've generally sent them emails back and forth discussing options and sending solutions, because at least then I'm providing something that I think would actually work in the English. I think one of the risks is that you could send something and get something back with the same kind of an issue. Because if it's there in the source, it might still be there, like it might not be still fully comprehensible for a non-English speaker. So I would say if you need to talk to and work with the author, go in with options, go with solutions.
Thank you. And Kasia said, the publisher has been involved. Translators, thank you so much for the advice there. I think that's been really helpful. Thank you. The next question, if we scroll down, which is absolutely wonderful, these questions, I'm loving it. It's from Charlotte. Charlotte says, challenge here for the three of you now. Where do you see yourselves in, say, 2 years? Regard to translating, editing literature that has been machine translated or AI written, some other variant, and will genre be a factor? I mean, some aspects that I wanted to ask you about as well, about, the looming shadow of AI and what that meant. So 2 years' time, Megan, where do you see yourself in 2 years' time?
I would love to be working on more children's and young adult fiction and speculative fiction, because I know it exists in Norway. It would just be nice to work on more of it. Oh, and the graphic novels, obviously, I'd love to still be working on those and having them published. I do not want to be editing, post-editing machine translation in fiction. I think that's more of an issue of fiction than it is in commercial translation, although I still think it's an issue there as well for many reasons. But I just think fiction, there is so much lying in each word choice. And I think at the end of the day, that it just takes away entirely from the craft and from the joy of reading and having transferred something from one language into another without it just being word for word. I think doing that, it's kind of disrespectful to what it actually takes to translate something. Yes, so none of that in fiction, please.
Okay, thank you. Rosie, for yourself, 2 years' time?
I don't know. I mean, the mention immediately of AI and things is interesting because it will impact what I do. Because, like Megan, I would be opposed to editing things that be machine translated, not because I am particularly anti-AI, but more because I've edited other people's translations, for example, We're in a case where, you know, somebody did it, the publisher wasn't happy, they give it to someone else to improve, and it's a nightmare. It's so much more difficult than just doing it yourself.
So yeah.
So I think for me, if the industry moved in that direction, I would probably move away. But yeah, I mean, doing more of the same, I guess. It's a hard, in a sense, translation to hard because there isn't a natural career progression. It would be nice to think you might get paid more, for instance, the more experienced you are, but I think that that's kind of wishful thinking. But, you know, maybe picking and choosing jobs a bit more than I currently do. But I mean, it's only 2 years, so I don't think that much is going to change in the space of 2 years. But yeah, I think that in terms of genre being a factor for AI, I do think some genres are going to be more susceptible to being put through AI. I think that some publishing houses might think, for instance, we talked about crime fiction, I think they might think, oh, crime fiction is pretty straightforward, we could machine translate that and have someone post edit. I don't think that they would do that if they bought a novel that was a literary fiction novel. But again, I think that these are all kind of arbitrary terms. I don't think that you're going to get a good AI crime novel where you would get a bad literary fiction one. I don't think any of them would be particularly great. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds, whether things are AI generated, AI assisted. I mean, they are arguably already AI assisted if we are using things like online dictionaries,
Yes.
word reference, whatever. So
Yeah, thank you. Alex?
I would just, I completely agree with what's being said, but I would just say as well that that sort of technology, it's really good about conveying information on the large part, but when it comes to translating fiction, and especially when we're talking, I mean, any fiction, but especially with sorts of suspense and crime, rhythm, like it's really, I don't see an AI being able to sort of build up the rhythms in the text and the flow and the tension. I'm no computer technician, but that when I'm translating fiction, that's so important, and I don't see something having the same kind of grasp of that as a human.
And we had some discussions in our seminar group earlier where we all worked on translating the same text, and then we compared, and you know, the level of discussion that went into just, you know, the shortest of sentences. Yeah, it was really interesting, and obviously that can't be replicated by a machine. So yeah, I think a lot would be lost.
Yeah, and it makes me think again about, you know, maintaining the author's voice. You know, and can, I mean, I'm sure AI will get to a point where, you know, write a novel in the voice of, and I'm sure, you know, and out it comes that, yeah. But hopefully, yeah, let's not go there. It's slightly scary. Thanks again for the questions. We've got one from Caitlin. It says, do you have a favourite UK publishing house, one who is keen to take on translated Scandinavian fiction that you've enjoyed working with in the past? Now, this is always difficult, isn't it? Because if you mention someone and you leave someone out, you know, it's a bit tricky. But I just wonder, you know, from your experiences, you know, is there a house that you know, you just think, oh, great, they've asked me again?
I'm going to have to step out of this question because, sorry.
No, you go.
I have no fiction books published with UK publishing houses so far. They've all been US, so I get to sort of step out on a loophole.
Nice one, thanks, Alex. Yeah, that's good. Just sit back. Megan, for yourself?
Yeah, I've pretty much, when it comes to the crime fiction, I've always worked with a vendor on all 4 of the ones I've done, and of course, huge publisher of translated Scandinavian fiction. Another publishing house that I do really like in the UK as well that translates, publishes a lot of translations and international fiction is Comma Press, based in Manchester. Obviously also a northern publishing house, which is just great all round. Yeah, heartily recommend all of their texts. They're wonderful.
That's great. That's great. And Rosie, for yourself?
I've worked a lot with Arenda Books as well. They do like Scandinavian fiction, and they have very established contacts, I think, in the Scandinavian market. But again, when I think otherwise, who else have I worked with? I think actually it's a real kind of it's a real mix of different publishers. So I don't think I could kind of pick one in particular. I've had good experiences with all publishers, and I think that once you find a publishing house, if you're looking to kind of pick something that does something like what you have, that would be the kind of the way to go. But yeah.
Yeah. I am aware of time. I don't think we're going to get through all the questions. Sadly, translators, if you have a chance to get in and type responses, you know, then please, you know, do respond to the questions that were there. I'd like to come in, if I may, and be very selfish, and return to some genre questions, if we might. And if we look at that sense of, first of all, do you have, I mean, we've talked about crime fiction, but if we could, not that Dr Noir wants to park that to one side, because it's a wonderful, wonderful genre, but other genre in which you've taken tremendous delight, because what has it enabled you to do with language that maybe other genre haven't? You know, if somebody comes along and says, will you take this job because it's that, and you think, yes, wonderful, because it allows those, Alex, you talked about those different, you know, those mental, the muscles there, you know, what would you choose? What would you choose, Alex?
Well, yes, I would probably choose at the moment something that I haven't worked on so much before. I mean, I have, when we're speaking of genre, I have really enjoyed working in horror, because I mean, I don't go for sort of gore or blood in that sense, but I really love a kind of creeping sense of dread, even though that's quite hard to kind of live in for months. But I really like kind of figuring out what makes that tick. Otherwise, I do love playing with language. So I would also choose, a strong sense of voice, whatever genre that comes in. I do love, getting under the skin of a text and trying it on for size.
I love what you say, trying it on for size.
Yeah, that was a horrible mixed metaphor there. It's getting under a skin and trying it on. Yeah.
So wonderful. I love it. I love it. Rosie, is there a text that you would inhabit if you had that choice?
If I had time, if I had no deadline, no pressure. I think funny, something humorous. I think humor is a real challenge. So if it was for the kind of fun of the challenge, then humor, definitely, because it doesn't always translate directly. Different people in different countries laugh at very different things and express things in very different ways. And I think that would be a real challenge. And you don't see a lot of it. You do see some, but you don't see a lot from the Scandinavian languages, because I don't think it always lands. So that would be kind of something challenging and fun to work with. Whether I could actually make it work would be a different question.
And I love what you say about, the time, to be able to do that, just being in the text and not have that constraint that says, come on, there's a deadline. Okay. And Megan, for yourself?
Yeah, similarly, without a deadline, I would love to work on like a massive fantasy novel, like something with like real strong world building that you can just make stuff up. Like all of the made up words in Norwegian or something, you get to make up the alternative and have it fit in with the story and the overall vibe, the setting, everything. I would really love to do that. It'd be a challenge, but it'd be fun.
Okay, thank you. Maybe if Kate will allow me one more question here, because I can see the clock. It is not our friend this evening. We'll stick within genre, and this might be a bit of a tricky thing. We've said that idea of when a job comes along and it's paid, so that's good. But of all the genre that are available, could you talk to us about one that you wouldn't choose and why? Is there somewhere where you just do not feel that you want to set foot, and why might that be?
Well, for me, I think horror. I know Alex mentioned horror. Horror does not not my thing. Just
Yeah.
I'm too creeped out too easily. So for me, that's kind of an easy one, just to say I'm too much of a wimp.
Okay, so no horror, no gore.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, Alex. Yeah.
I struggle with gore as well. So I do love horror, but if anything is too kind of graphic or I struggle with that.
Can't it, right? Crime can be pretty like.
It makes me wonder whether you talked about humor, Rosie, and how humor's of course each culture has its humor, and I wonder about gore and horror. Are they within the Scandinavian family? Are the Norwegians gorier than the Swedes? Are the Danes quite mild? And wouldn't know that. I don't know. But Megan, we've not allowed you to answer about the genre that just makes you think, oh no, please not that.
I don't know if there is anything. I would guess maybe a full-on like Mills and Boons romance. I would not particularly be keen to work on, but yeah, I'd probably work on anything. I think it'd be fun.
I get the sense from the three of you how much joy and delight you take in what you do. The three of you have, been so open and generous with your responses. There's been a lot of smiles as we've talked about. I wonder, maybe one last question, and it's a really simple one. What is the most important aspect that you've learned about translating genre fiction since you began? It's almost like that you wish you knew that when you started.
It's okay to ask questions. That goes for translating anything. I think when I started out, I said this before, actually, but when I started out, I thought that if I asked questions, I would reveal that I didn't know things, or that I was just an imposter, that I wasn't qualified to have the job. And actually, that's not true at all. And having the confidence to ask questions or to say that you don't understand something, that shows that you do know what you're doing, because you understand that there are many levels to things. So yeah, don't be afraid to ask questions.
Right, ask questions. Megan?
Yeah, I would say the exact same, and also take some time away from the text to do something else, because it's in those moments when you're doing something really mundane, or you're lying in bed about to go to sleep and you suddenly remember the very specific word that you needed to use. So make sure you have some time off, let your brain just sit and think for itself.
Thank you. And Alex, would you add anything different to this?
I mean, those are two top pieces of advice. But I would also just add, link to Megan's, that do whatever you can to allow you to come at the text as a reader rather than as a translator, whether that's, for me, it's sort of standing up, taking a walk, changing font sizes or fonts, printing it out, anything that can sort of bring you to the text with fresh eyes, because then you'll get a real insight into what is working and what is not.
Wonderful. I have so many more questions, and I know we had other questions from the audience. Sadly, I feel we must draw this to a close. I hope we get a chance to meet again. Before I thank you individually, we should say that our session has been kindly supported by the Danish Arts Foundation, NORLA, Norwegian Literature Abroad, the Swedish Arts Council, and Arts Council England, and we're most grateful for that. Megan Turney, Alex Fleming, Rosie Hedger, it has been an absolute delight to be in your company this evening, and to hear from those people who bring us texts that we take great delight in. May your careers be long and illustrious. May we always see your names there as the people who've translated, and may that recognition of the translator just keep growing. It's becoming more and more, prevalent, and it's so important. Bless you. Everybody who's joined us, thank you so much. Enjoy your translating and enjoy your fiction in translation. Good night, everyone, and thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Bye.